My name is Steph Laberis, and I was the character designer for Mermaids on Mars. I'm one of those people that was drawing since they could hold a crayon, and I grew up on cartoons and video games, so I knew at a really young age that I wanted to be in animation at some point. I try to get inside the character's head first. I try to figure out what part do they have in the story. Do I know anybody like them? Can I bring aspects of my friends' personalities or people that I know into what I'm doing? Because I think that kind of makes them more believable. You got to start from somewhere. And from the very beginning, I look over the notes of what the general character outline should be, because it's good to have some base. And from there, I'll just lay out like 6 to 8 designs. I'll do a lot of research. I'll look at fashion from the time that the character has lived in. In the case of Julian, I looked up a lot of old family photos from the 70s, and I was like, what are 10-year-old boys doing back then? Like what are they wearing? What are their hairstyles? And I kind of start from there and take almost like a Mr. Potato Head approach to it, where I'll try different hair on different heads and different shirts on different bodies, and it's kind of mix and match. And then once we all review it and I get more notes back, it's kind of lather, rinse, repeat, depending on what the requests are at that point. And in general, my work is very shape-driven. I like to make really graphic characters, starting with big, bold shapes and kind of carve away from there. So I think that I use a lot of shape theory and shape language when I'm considering characters as well. I am primarily a 2D designer. My background is in illustration. And usually when I design for animation, it's for a 2D project, like a TV show or something. So when you have constraints for 3D, you have to take into consideration, how is this character going to look from different angles? Like, this character looks really great from the front and the shapes I used are really wacky, but can this exist in real life? And then, you get roped back into reality and the laws of physics, and you have to make sure that what you're designing can work on skeletons and can work with the materials and stuff like that. And thankfully, I had Victoria to help me really kind of rein it in. We had a tail model that we had to work with from the get-go. That, I think, kind of informed how I was going to build the body around that. There were quite a few restrictions, actually, when designing for this film, because we had to build them around skeletons and rigs, so I had to not go too nuts with weird shapes. I couldn't do a character who was, 3 heads tall, for example, because that would be out of balance and it wouldn't work. So I had to kind of stay within those proportions, but still try to keep it interesting. So I looked at a lot of Art Nouveau, actually, because that was sort of the era in which the style of the mermaid portions of the film was taking place. And I looked at very curvy women, like more diverse body types, wanted to kind of keep things, just visually interesting and keep the characters looking unique, especially with the mermaids, because you can call them out with different hairdos or, different colors, stuff like that. Glaucus was interesting to create. I've never really designed aliens, I have to admit. Typically I'm designing animal characters, and he was more humanoid for an alien. One thing we did too to kind of work around the constraints is we made sure that he didn't have a mouth to animate. We put a mask on his face so that we could kind of jostle that, and I made sure to put really big expressive eyebrows on him so that way he could emote through the eyes, so that the mouth wouldn't sort of limit him in that way. Colors. I love designing with color. So when choosing the colors for mermaids, again, the first thing I have to do is be aware of my limitations. And when doing that, I think, what color are the backgrounds mostly going to be in this movie? Because you generally don't want the characters to get lost. So this was tricky because the 2 colors of the backgrounds were pretty opposite. There was a lot of blues for the nighttime and underwater, and then there was red on Mars. So I ran into a lot of trouble where it was like, oh, I'll design this character to be, like Julian, to be mostly orange or redheaded. That way he'll pop in the night scenes and underwater. And then it's like, oh, when he's on Mars, he kind of disappears. So it was a balancing act for sure. It's tough. It's really tough to make everyone's color palettes kind of jive when you line them all up next to each other, especially with the mermaids. I didn't want to have too much blue on blue with them, but I wanted to try to keep them looking marine-ish, and trying to keep cooler colors that are more towards greens, and purples, and kind of getting away from true blues. I'm Team Mermaid. Actually, no, I'm Team Gilbert. Gilbert is my spirit animal. I love his character. I love his design. I love his push broom mustache, and a little bit of trivia, he was very loosely based on my own dad, so I'm biased. But more power to the dorks.